Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama after Max Verstappen refused to yield to Sergio Perez and to Red Bull team orders at the end of the Brazilian Grand Prix to give Perez a couple extra points in his fight for P2 in the World Drivers' Championship. Verstappen's reasons supposedly date back to Monaco, where Perez supposedly deliberately crashed in qualifying to make sure he would start ahead of Max. Today we're going to break down all the arguments in favour and the arguments against to see if this really did occur. Did Perez deliberately crash? And if he did, what would the consequences potentially be? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's give you guys all the details and kind of the context behind this then. Yesterday at the end of the race, Perez was passed on the older mediums compared to Verstappen's soft tyres towards the end of the race. Verstappen was chasing down Alonso and to try and get Leclerc to take some points away from Ferrari. Turns out that couldn't happen. And they told Max, yeah, look, let Perez pass again because we're only fighting over P6, P7 here. And look, he had about a 4-second lead on Perez at that point. Back in Hungary 2018 was it, Hamilton had a 7-second lead over Valtteri Bottas. Similar situation was occurring and they told Hamilton, look, let Bottas through for the podium. You couldn't get the move done on Kimi Raikkonen, so that's how we're going to finish the race. He did, he yielded, he waited all that time for Bottas to pass him, gave him P3, P4, and that was in the thick of the championship fight. Vettel at that point was in the lead of the championship by 11 points. If Hamilton stayed third, he would have been still 11 points behind. He gave the position to Bottas and was 14 points behind after that. So that was, you could argue good sportsmanship. This, after both championships have been decided, has generally rubbed people up the wrong way, even Perez himself. It shows who he really is. Now, look, this is the situation in the championship. Excluding Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez tied on 290 going into the final race. That wouldn't have been the case if Verstappen had yielded to Perez. Now, Verstappen even comes on to say afterwards, yeah, look, at Abu Dhabi, I'll help him if I get a chance to. I understand why he's disappointed, but you also have to understand why I did it, and I gave my team the reasons why. So what were these reasons? They were getting rumoured about last night and everyone was pointing towards the Monaco Grand Prix earlier this season. Brundle was in commentary and also Eric Van Haren, admittedly close to the Verstappen camp, Dutch media in general, but his description was that what someone said on Viaplay was accurate, that indeed Perez deliberately crashed in qualifying in Monaco and has apparently admitted this to Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Now if this is the case, then it's remarkable to me that this hasn't been talked about more before now. Apparently Max hadn't forgotten that, therefore decided in this case not to yield the position. But the thing is for Red Bull is it's like, well, this has just created a whole new kettle of fish for them to deal with. I'm sure Christian Horner, who's been going like super hard PR the last couple of months after all the cost cap drama, now he's got to deal with it again because now all of a sudden, because Max didn't yield the position, if he did, no one would even be talking about this. But because he is, now everyone's saying, damn, is Perez, did he did he manipulate the result of qualifying back in Monaco? And therefore, what is the consequence of that? Verstappen has certainly not done himself or his team any favours in this scenario, but if this is indeed the reason, we've got to look into whether any of this is legitimate. Firstly, let's talk about some of the arguments against this. Perez was not even on pole at the Monaco Grand Prix. He was third when he crashed out of qualifying, and eventually it was Leclerc, Sainz P1, P2, it was Perez P3, Verstappen P4. So would Perez deliberately crash to force Verstappen behind him when he's not even on pole? Seems relatively unlikely. The motive to me doesn't quite add up. Like, crashing in a P3 situation, also you've got to consider the way he crashed the car, the rear of his car went into the wall, that could have caused gearbox damage, that could have meant a gearbox change. It's very risky the where he crashed. And I'll show you, of course, the picture right here. So this is the crash that he had out of going, well, basically before you go into the tunnel here in Monaco, come out of the hairpin, turn right again, and this is where he crashed into the wall. And this is Verstappen obviously not so happy. The fact that his teammate crashed out and brought him into the qualifying session where he ended up P4. And even after that weekend, Jos Verstappen and others were like, yeah, well, maybe Red Bull didn't do enough to help Max's cause that weekend. Perez eventually won. It was Max Verstappen P3, Leclerc P4, right after the Ferrari strategy disaster class. But yeah, so Perez crashed in this instance. The motive doesn't quite make sense to me. He was only P3 at the time, and like putting it in the wall here runs the risk of damaging his own car. What did he really have to gain in this situation? Probably not that much. However, the telemetry and other factors do point to a different story, and it also is worth mentioning they'd just come away from Spain, where you guys remember the team orders drama back in Spain, where Perez was at one time in the race or was on the faster strategy. He had the pace to get past Verstappen and then probably get past George Russell in front. You guys might remember George Russell versus Verstappen was a pretty good battle there, and Verstappen, his DRS actuator flap wasn't working properly, so he couldn't make the pass on Russell. Perez was like, hey, I'm on the quicker strategy at this point in the race, let me pass Max, I'll get Russell, they can keep fighting, and then I'll be able to effectively not compromise compromise my race. They told him though, Red Bull were like, no, stay behind. We want Max to get this move done. They completely compromised his race. Yes, eventually it was a P1, P2, a 1-2 anyway for Red Bull, but Perez probably felt hard done by that the team had gone against his wishes to just let him past and let him run his own race where he might have had a chance to battle Max for the win. They effectively gifted it to Max by holding Perez behind, and he may have had that in the back of his mind going into Monaco when this situation occurred. Now, of course, this isn't a new thing, drivers doing things deliberately to try and influence the result of qualifying. It's happened many times in the past. Schumacher's done it before at Monaco. Even, consider Crashgate from back in Singapore. This stuff happens. Even this was earlier this season in Baku when Alonso accidentally forgot to change his brake bias, went running off down the escape route, brings out the yellow flags, and then Alex Albon's lap gets ruined behind him so Alonso can maintain the position. That was considered kind of cheeky tactics, but that is arguably still manipulating the result of qualifying, which is apparently what Perez tried to do. So I'm going to share this clip for you guys of the onboard telemetry from the lap before Perez crashed to the lap that he crashed. And the telemetry data is rather interesting. When he goes around the corner, he gets on full power for a brief moment and spins the car into the wall. So this is the telemetry here. Here's Perez coming out of the coming out of the hairpin, turning right. So he puts the power on to turn right, then brakes into the final corner where he crashes, and then puts on. You saw that full power for a split second. The full power was on in a corner. This is halfway through the corner. If you put full power on there, there's no way the rear of the car is going to be able to apply that amount of force. And you could even hear by the onboard that that was too much throttle. Now, of course, look, this is a little bit suspicious, right? It must be said, but at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, no one even talked about this at the time. It was unfortunate, but still not like Perez was on pole or anything. And you'd have thought that if this was legitimate, especially if Perez has actually apologized for it, there would have been more discussion at the time with Ferrari and Mercedes and these other teams to say, hang on a second, was this some sort of race manipulation here in qualifying? Because Monaco is certainly a track that you can do this and maybe or maybe not get away with it. So yeah, what do you guys think about this? Because it's definitely interesting. At the same time, is it just an honest mistake? It's arguable, right? And Perez could always say, well, look, I just put too much throttle. It is what it is. It's just unfortunate. It's pretty much impossible here to indicate if there's actually any intent going on unless he actually admitted to it, right? And this is where things get pretty interesting because the rumor has it now that potentially Perez, after this, apologized to the team and said, look, yeah, I crashed deliberately. Something came over me. I don't know what it was. I put it in the wall to keep Max behind, maybe to get revenge from Spain. I don't know what the thought process was, if that even was the case. But yeah, apparently he apologized to the team. And if that's the case and he's effectively admitted to doing this, then what are the consequences? Because after the race he was getting asked hey, why did Verstappen not let you through? What were these reasons? And Perez was kind of saying, well, I don't know what those reasons could have been. But the way he said it made me thought that maybe he kind of does know what those reasons are, but didn't really want to say it to the press at the time, and is probably not so happy that Max, by doing this, has brought all these gremlins back up to the surface. And supposedly the conversations were overheard by some between Helmut Marko, Red Bull guy, and Perez, who basically just scolded him for whatever actions he took in Monaco the next time out in Baku. So, yeah, it's really spicy stuff. Now, of course, the final talking point here is what happens if this is the case. You guys can make your own mind up. I've tried to present some of the arguments against, some of the arguments for. Yes, the telemetry is suspicious. I'm not sure personally the motive fully adds up, but if he did admit to it, and this is effectively manipulation of qualifying, what even are the consequences in this case? I'm not really sure what they would or should do, and the fact that it's not being talked about until Verstappen refused to yield for P6 is quite remarkable. But if Perez is found or has been found, or an investigation is done by the FIA or even by Red Bull into whether Perez manipulated the result, then, what is the implications of that? Is Perez, does Perez get fired by Red Bull over this? That would be an absolutely crazy turn of events. I doubt it's going to happen. I doubt this kind of goes anywhere. I'm sure that Red Bull will try and sweep it under the rug as much as possible, but it also must be said the Perez-Verstappen relationship has certainly soured somewhat after this weekend, and Daniel Ricciardo was rumoured just a couple of days ago now to be the man who's going to be joining Red Bull in their reserve driver seats. So, like, there'd be an absolutely unbelievable timeline if Perez gets fired or gets dropped, or I don't even know what would happen as a result of this, if he is found to, this is legitimate what we've discussed here, but as I say, proving intent here is incredibly difficult to do unless he admitted it himself. And if there's any records of that, then, they might come to light potentially over the coming days and weeks, and maybe Daniel Ricciardo stepping back into the Red Bull. I mean, that would be quite the storyline. Hope it doesn't happen. Hope Perez can maintain the seats. But if he did do this deliberately, then does that change any of your opinions on the way Verstappen has handled this situation? It's kind of tough to say. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.